themselves. I call the Honourable David Parker.
The Honourable Bill English's problem is that he's painted himself into a corner. He's ruled out land tax, he's ruled out a capital gains tax, and yet he's written a budget that in his own projections has New Zealand returning to a current account deficit of over 6%, a current account deficit that grows every year from here on, the current account deficit being funded by increasing foreign debt for New Zealand every year. So that his own budget projection shows that if Mr English and his allies in the National Party are re-elected for another term, then at the end of 6 years of their government, New Zealand gets poorer, then the next year they get poorer, and then the next year after that, New Zealanders get poorer still. Because the structural problems that bedevil the New Zealand economy have not been solved by the government's tinkering. They have done nothing substantial. They have not pulled the levers that need to be pulled to redirect precious investment capital into the productive sector, currently going into the speculative sector at the expense of the productive export sector. Mr Speaker, Craig Elliffe is a former partner of Chapman Tripp, a former tax partner of KPMG and now an academic and a successful businessman in his own right. He says we need a capital gains tax because he says to the extent to which you have tax policies that are distortionary on the economic levers and contributors to society, it's wrong. And he says, how sensible is it to have property investment 4 or 5 times the size of the share market producing no tax revenue? That's one of the comments. We've had another comment from the Herald on Sunday criticising the National Party at the same time as saying we were right to be looking at a capital gains tax. He says, apart from borrowing money and talking up questionable program of asset sales, National is showing no signs of a plan to get us out of the mess we're in. True. They're right. The Dominion has said something similar. The NBR has talked about how there is a need to have a tax on capital. The Manufacturers and Exporters Association says the eradication of the capital gains tax harbour will help to lift productive investment. A more balanced tax system will see investment flow to the most intrinsically profitable areas of the economy rather than those that are tax advantaged. The Productive Economy Council says something similar. A capital gains tax sends the right signals for investors, and it means that those choosing to take the path of unproductive property investment will have to be paid their fair share of tax. While fairness in tax is good, the real long-term benefit is the chance to get more of our limited capital invested in New Zealand's more, not less, competitive industries. Mr Speaker, we've heard others like Gareth Morgan say something similar. The National Party is on the wrong side of this argument, and they should admit it. They've got $48 million in this budget, and this estimate's going for policy advice from Treasury. What does the Treasury say? Last time after they spent $48 million, they say introduce a capital gains tax to make the economy stronger as well as to make the tax system fairer. I want to deal with Mr English's assertion of tax and spend. We always knew that they'd come back to their original mantra. Tax and spend is the accusation that they make against us. The problem is they're wrong. It's not true. It's not true. They say that our revenue projections are wrong. Well, actually, our revenue projections are all out there, and the only one that's taken a flick at them other than Mr English is his colleague Mr Joyce, and it hasn't cut through because actually the biggest line item is the revenue from the capital gains tax. The Treasury's estimate of the long-term revenue from a capital gains tax, excluding the family home, was $4.8 billion per annum. Actually, we remodelled that through our consultants, Burl, Business and Economic Research Limited, and they cut that back by $2 billion per annum at the maturity of the scheme. So it's raising $2.8 billion per annum once it's a mature scheme rather than $4.8 billion. The sensitivities in the Burl analysis show that it could actually be $1 billion per annum more than that, but we've actually taken the conservative course and we've assumed the lower figure. Mr. Speaker.
I call the Honourable
Mr. Chairman.
David
Mr.
Parker.
Chairman. Oh, have I? Oh, sorry. I've taken the call, so I'm committed now. Mr. Chairman, the new progressive top tax rate raises money. So does the lost ring fencing. So do other anti-avoidance measures, and so does a moderate amount of revenue from the agricultural sector from ETS revenues. This allows us to fund a tax-free zone that David Cunliffe has already indicated, the first $5,000 of income for every person tax-free. That's whether you're on a low income or a high income, whether you're a superannuitant or someone in paid work. In addition, there's GST off fresh fruit and vegetables, and there's an R&D tax credit that is funded. Mr. Chairman, these measures are all properly costed, and the government's claims to the contrary are not credible. They are not credible. Over the period in our table, which has been publicly released, and despite Mr. English's comments to misrepresent it, it does show that over that period we reduced debt by $7.7 billion more from that package than the government would. In other words, our debt track is better than the government's debt track. Are people surprised by that? Well, they shouldn't be. They shouldn't be, Mr. Chairman, because when we were last in government, we reduced government debt. We reduced net government debt to zero. We reduced gross government debt to 17%. And we did it every time with the national opposition at the time opposing the budget surpluses that did it. They said, give tax cuts. Well, of course, we're now in a $16.7 billion deficit this year as a consequence, in part, of Mr. English's inability to properly cost his income tax package. His prior income tax cuts resulted in an increase in the New Zealand deficit of over $1 billion. Over $1 billion over that period was paid out over 4 years of tax cuts, in addition to the revenue that was collected from the switch. So he created a fiscal hole. He's also done nothing to cure the underlying imbalances in our economy, which are caused in part by the signal that people get. They make additional money from additional returns from their rental investment because of the tax bias in favour of residential property. $200 billion of investment and very little tax paid from that area. That's why the Treasury favour this change. That's why the IMF favour it. That's why the OECD favour it. That's why Australia has it. The Prime Minister said this would put a dagger through the heart of the economy. Since the Australian economy has had a capital gains tax, the value of their share market has increased 17-fold. Over the same period, New Zealand's share market has increased in value 3-fold. So far from it putting a dagger through the heart of the economy, it's one of the things that you need in order to get that precious investment capital going into the right sectors of the economy so that we can grow our exports, so that instead of this parlous future that the national government has planned for us, where our net investment position goes to negative 85% of GDP by about 2015, right down there towards Greece, Portugal, Hungary and Iceland. Instead of that, we would actually have New Zealand going the opposite direction, because we would have investment in jobs, investment in the productive export sector, and start earning our way in the world. And that's why the government is on the wrong side of this debate. Mr. English, you should just accept that your Treasury officials are right, that your Reserve Bank officials are right. One of the reasons they like it is that over time it leads to lower interest rates, to the benefit of not just the export sector, but everyone in New Zealand who has a mortgage. They get lower interest rates if you've got a capital gains tax. The savings working group that the government set up told them that half of the last property bubble would have been avoided if we had a capital gains tax, which would have meant that the Reserve Bank didn't have to pull as hard on the interest rate lever to curb inflation. So we would have lower rates of inflation, there would be less pressure on the exchange rate, and therefore, again, our exporters would benefit, as would the people that work in those industries. Instead, we have Mr Foss and his other Neanderthals in the economic front in the National Party saying that we're on the wrong side of this debate when we're with every OECD country other than Turkey and Switzerland, Switzerland being a tax haven.
I call the honourable member Amy Adams.
Thank you, Mr Chairman, and it's so great